What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Stamina Sorcerer. So the Stam Sorc is still a top end stamina DPS. It still falls pretty much in line with where it was pre-Summerset, in that it does fall short of the Stamina Nightblade when it comes to single target DPS, but it does exceed the Stamina Nightblade when it comes to AoE damage potential. Just because of Hurricane. So the Stam Sorc is a pretty nice DPS class to run overall, but again, the Stamina Nightblade does usually end up beating it out when it comes to single target DPS. Now the Stamina Sorcerer probably underwent the largest change in Summerset when compared to Dragonbones, owing to the fact that Bound Armaments was changed to buff light attacks instead of heavy attacks. So now Stam Sorcs are no longer running heavy attack builds, they are now running light attack builds, which necessitates us making several changes to our build when compared to Dragonbones. So we'll be going over those changes today, along with everything else that you're going to need to know about the build. So gear, skills, CP points, attributes, race, things like that. We'll talk about some alternative gear sets as well, because there are several other gear options that you can choose from now that pull very similar DPS to what the build that I'm showing you guys today. We'll go talk about our rotation for a little bit here. Stam Sorcs are still using a fairly static rotation, so that much hasn't changed. It's just that now we're going with a light attack rotation, so we will have to change up a little bit of our skill sets here, as well as how we're going to end up using them. And then we'll top things off with the 6-man dummy parts so you guys can get an idea of the DPS that you're able to pull, as well as kind of get a sense of kind of how the Stam Sorc compares to other stamina DPS classes. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. First off with our gear. So for our Monster Helm set, we are going with Stormfist. Stormfist comes from Tempest Island. Fairly easy that dungeon to complete. You can go with Selene's instead. Now that they've changed light attacks to scale off of your max resources from a ratio of 10.5 to 1 compared to the old 40 to 1. Selene's does end up matching or even exceeding Veladreth when it comes to DPS. However, Stormfist provides an additional stamina regen bonus, which is going to be very, very powerful for us. Again, Stamina Sorcerers are using a light attack rotation now, which means we're going to need as much recovery as we can get. So we are going with Stormfist instead for the additional stamina regen here. In addition, Stormfist does have some pretty nice synergy with the Stamina Sorcerer because of that shock damage and physical damage. We do get additional bonus to our shock damage, as well as the implosion passive. So during execute at below 50% health, we get an additional chance of getting some additional damage. It's pretty small, only 6% chance, but every little bit does help when it comes to DPS. Now you'll notice that I am on a heavy shoulders right now, so I do like to go with 6 medium, 1 heavy, but you can go with 7 medium if you would like. I just prefer to have that additional heavy piece for some additional resources, particularly the extra health. And I do have a max health enchant here in order to help get us over to the 17k, or as close as we can get to the 17k health threshold here. So because we are using Dubious Camoran Throne for the additional stamina regen, so we do need to make that up the missing health with a heavy piece and a max health enchant here. Now for our 5-piece, we're going with Relequens. Relequens is a very powerful set here. So I am on the PTS, so the 5-piece is a little bit different compared to on live right now. It was nerfed a little bit on live. We have the perfect version here, but you can go with the imperfect version if you would like. The imperfect version and perfect version, the only difference is that max stamina enchant bonus on the 5-piece effect. If you don't have 5 perfected versions of the Relequen set pieces, then you will lose that max stamina. So even if you have 1 imperfect piece, you will not get that max stamina. We have Divines with stamina enchants throughout. Now for our jewelry. So we have our second set is going to be Ravager, which is a PvP set. You need to purchase this or get it from Rewards of the Worthy. You can purchase it random pieces from the Vlastarius merchant as long as your faction controls Vlastarius. So because Ravager is a heavy set, you do need to have the jewelry and the weapons. You can't really go with any sort of armor pieces with Ravager, especially if you're using Relequen, because you do want Relequen active on both bars in order to maintain the stacks on Relequen. So for our jewelry enchants, we have all weapon damage enchants, and then for our traits, we have 3 Bloodthirsty. You can go with 1 Bloodthirsty and 2 Infused instead. It's all going to be dependent on how many Bloodthirsty traits your DPS are running as a whole. The more Bloodthirsty traits you have, the higher your DPS is going to be, generally speaking, during execute phase. However, the trade-off is you will end up losing DPS overall in the first 75% of the boss's health. So you kind of got to make that balance there. If you run Infused or Robust instead of Bloodthirsty, you will be able to gain that additional weapon damage or the max resources boost throughout the entirety of the fight rather than just the last 25% of the boss's health. So I'm going with 3 Bloodthirsty here, but in a raid, usually speaking, 1 Bloodthirsty and 2 Infused is going to be a little bit better, just a hair better. 3 Bloodthirsty is still pretty strong even in a raid scenario. For our weapons, you should be going Double Dagger, but because we don't have I don't have 2 daggers of the Ravager set, we're going with Dagger Axe. The difference is going to be fairly small overall. Double Dagger is going to end up being stronger than Dagger Dax, generally speaking. So we have on our main hand we have nirn with a poison damage enchant, and then on our offhand we have Infused with a weapon damage enchant. I'm actually going to pull some soul gems out so I can recharge that weapon. Then for our back bar, we're still going with the Maelstrom Bow. The Maelstrom Bow is still the strongest bow, and it's still a very powerful set here. So we're going with nirn. You can go with Precise instead if you would like. And we have the Double Ravage Health poisons here, which can be made using Nirn Root or Violet Comprinus, Fleshfly Larva, and Nightshade. So in terms of other sets that you can use here, if you don't have Relequens yet, for your body you can do something like Briarheart or Hunding's Rage or VO. VO is probably going to be the best out of those 3 options there. And then if you don't have Ravager yet, then there are several set options you can choose from that do fairly good DPS, very close DPS, so usually within 1 or 2k DPS. So the first set here is going to be Briarheart. You can get this from Hrothgar. It is a dropped set from Hrothgar, so you can purchase it off of guild traders. So this can be active on your body at all times, or it can be active as your weapons. It does provide a nice heal over time, but generally speaking, Briarheart's going to be one of the weaker sets because it doesn't have as much of a boost to your weapon damage overall compared to the Ravager or the other sets that we're going to explore. The next set that you might want to consider is going to be Mechanical Acuity. This is a crafted set, so you do want this to be on your weapon. So again, Double Dagger with 3 jewelry pieces or 3 body pieces. You can go with Advancing Yokeda. This is a drop set. This is heavy armor as well from Helra Citadel. So again, you will need the jewelry and the 2 weapons if you're going to want to use Advancing Yokeda here. Because we're going to be on our back bar for longer than 5 seconds, we will not necessarily be able to maintain a very good uptime on the full stacks of Advancing Yokeda. The maximum that I managed to get was around 70 to 71% on the max stack. So you're still capable of getting good uptime on it, but it's not going to be as high as, let's say, a Stamina Nightblade, where you're capable of basically swapping to your front bar and maintaining the full stack of Advancing Yokeda. Another set that you might want to consider is going to be Veiled Heritance. This is a drop set, again heavy armor from Auradon, so you will need the jewelry and the 2 weapons. This is again going to be a front bar set here. It doesn't have as high of a weapon damage boost compared to Briarheart or Ravager, but it does proc of any damage, so any damage at all compared to Ravager or Advancing, which procs off of melee damage, or Briarheart, which procs off of critical damage. So Veiled Heritance generally will have a little bit better uptime compared to the rest. But the weapon damage boost is weaker, and it's for a shorter period of time, so it's going to be a little bit weaker overall. Those are basically the sets that you might want to consider using. And again, for your body piece, if you don't have Relequen, VO is going to be the best piece overall to wear, but you can go with something like Hunding's instead if you don't have all pieces of VO for your body yet. Now we're going to go over our character sheet. I am a Khajiit, but you can go with Redguard instead. Redguards are going to be better, especially due to the fact that we have to do a light attack rotation now. Khajiits get 6% additional crit chance and 10% additional stamina regen. They don't get any sort of maxed stamina boost. Redguards that get 10% max stamina, they get 9% additional stamina regen, plus whenever they deal damage with a melee attack, I believe it's every 5 seconds they gain some additional stamina back. So Redguards are definitely going to be the best option for Sorks, or Stam Sorks, because of that really strong sustain. 2 other races that you might want to consider are going to be Wood Elves, the Bosmer. They get 6% max stamina, 21% stamina regen, that they're pretty strong to use. They're also very balanced for PvP because they do get additional poison and disease resistance, so they can't get poisoned and they can't get diseased, so that helps out protect you from the poison status effect as well as the major defile status effect from disease. So if you do intend on PvPing on the side, Wood Elves are not a bad choice to pick as a race. Then the final race, if you have access to the Imperial edition, then you can be an Imperial. Imperials get 10% max health and 10% max stamina, so that does help out kind of offset the loss in health when using Dubious Camoran Throne. And then every time they deal melee damage, they get, I think it's every 5 seconds, they get some health back, so that helps out your survivability as well. So it's basically like a health version of the Redguard passive. So Imperials are pretty nice to have. They get pretty good stamina and they get some additional health to help offset the Camoran Throne loss in health. Now for our attributes, we are using the Ravager, and the Ravager does have a health bonus as the 3-piece. So we're capable of putting all of our points into stamina. If we're using any of the other sets, we will need to put 10 points into health and 54 points into stamina instead in order to offset the health loss from using Dubious. So this leaves us with about 16,800 health and about 30k max stamina. We do have lower stamina compared to Dragonbones because we are using Bloodthirsty instead. Even if I was using Bloodthirsty and Infused, we still would not have as much max stamina compared to a Dragonbones build because we aren't using Robust anymore. So again, if you're using something like Advancing Yokeda, Veiled Heritance, Acuity, Briarheart instead of Ravager, then you will need to put 10 points into health in order to get a close approximation to 17k health. Now for our Mundustone, we're going with the Lover here. So we aren't using Twice Fanged Snake. You can use Twice Fanged Snake if you would like instead of Relequen. If you're going to be using Twice Fanged Snake, then you will be using the Warrior instead, so you don't overpenetrate by using the Lover. But if you're using Relequen or VO, then you will need to use the Lover instead in order to make up for that penetration. You will also need to put some points into Piercing as well. But if you decide to use the Warrior instead with Relequen, you'll need to put a lot more points into Piercing, and personally it's not really worth the trade-off there just to run the Warrior instead. So the general rule is if you're using Twice Fanged Snake, go with the Warrior. If you're not, then you can use the Lover instead. Now for our food, we're using Dubious Camoran Throne, so we get some stamina regen, but we also get some max stamina, max health. It's going to be lower max stamina, max health compared to using blue food, but because we are using a light attack build, we want as much regen as we possibly can get, so that's why we're using Dubious here instead. There is a gold version of this food that was released with Summerset Isle. The recipe itself can be obtained by fishing on the Artaeum zone. The recipe is not tradable, but the food itself is, so feel free to buy it if you would like. It's basically just slightly upgraded version of Dubious, but Dubious Camoran Throne is still perfectly fine to use instead of that gold food, because the gold food is going to be really expensive to buy. Now going over our skills. There's not a lot of flex spots here that we can really use. There's probably just one on the back bar, and that's pretty much it. Maybe one on the front bar here too. The Rending Slashes, you can go with the other morph Blood Craze if you want the additional survivability. It's kind of up to you. Shrouded Daggers, this is our spamble. You can actually use the Sigil Order spamble Crushing Weapon instead, but I like to have Shrouded Dagger instead for the additional cleave damage that you get from Crushing Weapon. But Crushing Weapon does have a nice heal associated with it, so you do get a nice like about 2k heal every time you use Crushing Weapon, so that's something you want to take into consideration as well. It's also it costs slightly less than Shrouded Dagger, so it is a little bit easier to sustain using Crushing Weapon instead. Deadly Cloak, Rearming Trap, and then we have Bound Armaments on our front bar here, and you can see here that it increases light attack damage instead of heavy attack damage as it used to in Dragonbones. Then we have Flawless Dawnbreaker for the weapon damage bonus. We're not going to be using this at all as a ultimate. For our back bar, we have Razor, Caltrops, Poison Injection, Endless Hail, pretty much the bread and butter for every stamina DPS in the game right now. We have Hurricane, and then we have Dark Deal. Dark Deal is going to be very, very important for us to use in order to help out our sustain, because it does give us about 5k stamina return in exchange for Magicka. So it's very important that we use Dark Deal instead. Dark Deal also acts as a good alternative for a replacement, I should say, for Vigor. It heals just about as much as Vigor does. There is a cast time associated with it, so that's kind of the downside of it. And it does cost magicka, so that's really nice to have instead of using stamina for a heal instead. So Dark Deal is a really important addition to our overall stamina sorcerer kind of repertoire here. Then our ultimate, you can, if you're going for single target DPS, go with Ballista. If you're going with AoE, then you can go with Suppression Field instead. Suppression Field is pretty strong for AoEs. It's not going to be quite as strong as like a Destro ulti, but it's Stam Sorks again are probably the strongest when it comes to AoE damage potential for stamina DPS because of Hurricane as well as the ability to use Suppression Field as an ultimate. And now moving on to our CPs. The CP cap is 750, so we have 250 points to split across each of the 3 different constellations. So starting off with our green CPs, we have 75 into Mooncalf, 75 into Tenacity. That leaves us with 100 points, which you can put across the remaining nodes however you would like. I personally have 40 into Shadow Ward, 31 into Tumbling, and 29 into Warlord. You can pretty much split them up however you'd like depending on the specific passives that you want to get. For our blue CPs, I do want to take note that this is with the Lover without Twice Fang Snake. If you are using Twice Fang Snake, your CP points are going to vary just a smidge, not too much. Overall, your blue CPs are going to pretty much remain exactly the same across any of your different gear combinations. So we have 16 into Piercing, 64 into Mighty, 56 into Precise Strikes, 72 into Thaumaturge, and we have 40 into Mastered Arms, and 2 into Physical Weapon Expert. Now for our red CPs, I take a one-size-fits-most approach, and then I shift my red CPs around according to the trial that I'm going to be running for that day. Just mainly to basically minimize the damage that I'm going to be taking as a DPS. So different trials have different sources of damage incoming. So AA, for instance, Ethereal Archive has more magical damage versus, let's say, Sanctum of Phidia, which has more physical types of damage. So they're going to have different red CPs in order to minimize the damage that you end up taking. So for the balanced approach, I go 66 into Ironclad, 56 into Thick-Skinned, 64 into Hardy, and Elemental Defender. Now, one node that I do want to point out here is going to be Quick Recovery. If you put 11 points into Quick Recovery, you hit the jump point and you gain the Field Physician passive, which reduces the damage you take while you're resurrecting another player. As a stamina DPS, you generally will not be the one resurrecting first. Typically, it's going to be a magic DPS that resurrects first, just because you don't have access to a shield. But for progression guilds, it's going to be nice to have this Field Physician passive if you do have to end up resing somebody. Typically, it's going to be another melee DPS. So I do recommend picking this up if you are in a progression style guild, if you're running progression. Now, some of you guys might be wondering, well, what if I want to run Crit Surge? If you want to run Crit Surge, you're going to have to give up one skill slot somewhere here. So on the back bar here, not really much you can give up. Dark Deal is arguable. I would say Dark Deal is non-negotiable because you do need it to help sustain your overall rotation. So on the front bar here, you would probably replace Rending Slashes with Crit Surge if you want to run Crit Surge at all for the additional heal. It's up to you. I personally don't really see a need to run Crit Surge if you're running Dark Deal, because we will be using Dark Deal every time we're on our back bar. So we'll always be having that additional 8k heal pretty much every time we're on our back bar. So I really don't see a reason to run Critical Surge or Vigor on this particular build setup. So let's go ahead and talk about our rotation. So Stam Sorks have a pretty static rotation overall. So the one thing that I do want to make note of is the fact that Hurricane deals more damage overall the longer that it lasts. So you don't want to re-up Hurricane too early, because if you do, then you're basically losing out on your biggest hits towards the end of the duration. With this rotation, we will not have Hurricane running out at all. We will have Hurricane up 100% of the time, basically. But we'll basically be doing this second to last. The last ability that we're going to be using on our back bar is going to be Poison Injection, so that way we can swap cancel it to get the weapon damage boost on our front bar when it's calculated. But Hurricane will be our second to last ability. When we use our ultimate on our back bar, if it's up, we'll do Endless Hail, Razor Caltrops, Dark Deal, Ultimate, and then Hurricane, which you guys will see when we do our 6 billion dummy parse. And then on our front bar here, always want to keep up Deadly Cloak for that damage mitigation. 25% damage mitigation is really, really strong and very important for our survivability because we don't have access to a shield ability. Then we have Rearming Trap for the minor force. You want to try to keep this up as much as you can. And then Shroud Daggers is our main spam bull here. So rotation is going to look like this. Obviously you want to buff up first with a potion, and we do not open with Ballista because Ballista is affected by the Hawkeye passive. So we want to hit as many stacks of Hawkeye as we can before we activate Ballista, because the Ballista is affected by Hawkeye. So we start off with Endless Hail, Caltrops, Hurricane, Dark Deal, then we do Ballista, Poison Injection. Front bar we go Rending Slashes, Deadly Cloak, Rearming Trap. We use our spam bowl here. And we do Dark Deal, Hurricane, Poison Injection. Now we will do one heavy attack on our front bar every other time we're on our front bar here. So we do one heavy attack, then we go back to our back bar rotation. Again, Dark Deal first, then Hurricane, then Poison Injection. Now if we were using Ballista here, we'd use Ballista now, and then Hurricane, and then Poison Injection. And this is the second time we're on our front bar, so we will end up doing a heavy attack here to help Ardos sustain there. And that's basically the rotation. Again, it's a static rotation, so you're not really going to be varying too much. And because you don't have an execute like Stam Nightblades, you're pretty much not going to be changing the rotation at all during execute phase. So that's what we mean by static rotation. It's pretty much going to be remain exactly the same no matter what you're doing. So let's go ahead and do a 6 million dummy parse here. Now I do want to mention here that Stam Sorks do not have a native source of major fracture. So if you want to compare DPS, just keep that in mind. Stamina Nightblades, Stamina DKs, and Stamina Wardens all have sources of major fractures built into their abilities. So if you want to compare to those three classes, what you're going to want to do is you just basically want to add about 10% DPS to a Stam Sork, and you'll get about what you would hit if you had major fracture. It's going to be about anywhere between 8 to 12% is what I've seen increase in DPS. Mathematically, it's going to be closer to about 10% overall. So let's go ahead and get started with our 6 million dummy parse so you guys get an idea of what the rotation looks like. I will try and narrate throughout it, and also so you guys can see what it pulls compared to other stamina DPS this patch. So again, we open up with, I like to open up with Rearming Trap and obviously buff up with potions first. I actually do Dark Deal first and then Ballista and then Poison Injection. So remember, we want to do Dark Deal first because we do want those later ticks of Hurricane to hit. Now we're on our second time on our front bar here. So we will do a heavy attack. I like to do my heavy attack when there's about 2 seconds left on Endless Hail. I found that to be the best timing, because you do want your Endless Hail, the final couple of ticks to happen while you're on your front bar here, because it does inherit damage based on which bar you are currently on. We'll do a heavy attack. So ideally you have it run out while you're on your front bar. Then Ballista, Hurricane, Poison Injection if you have your Ballista up. Again, this is the second time we're on our front bar, so we do that heavy attack. So you can see here that we are capable of sustaining Dark Deal every time we're on our back bar here. By the time we're on our back bar a second time, we have pretty much recouped that Magicka cost. So you can see here, it's a very static rotation. Go heavy attack here. Now in a longer fight, you might need to do a heavy attack every time you're on your front bar here. that's fine. You shouldn't need to do any more than one heavy attack on your front bar if you are doing a one heavy attack front bar rotation. Alright, so there we go. That is the DPS that you can expect to see from a stamina Sorc, at least on a self-buff Sorc. So we have 39.4k flat, and you can see here the Ravager, we got 60% uptime on the Ravager. Now, one thing I do want to make note of when you're using the Ravager is that because it procs off of melee damage, currently Relequen does count as melee damage. We're not sure if this is a bug or not, so that's just something to keep in mind. Ravager is best paired with Relequen. If you're using something like VO, by all means you can continue to use Ravager, but don't expect to have a 60% uptime. You might see something closer to like 50% or 45%, but it's still very strong overall. But if you don't have Relequen and you're using VO instead, you might want to use one of the other sets, Veiled Heritance, Briarheart, Acuity, or you advance Yokeda, because those will generally perform a little bit better. The difference between all those sets, again, is really small. It's anywhere between 1 to 2k DPS, sometimes even less than that. So you can see here, Endless Hail, Arms of Relequen, all very strong. Very, very powerful DPS. Then we have Razor Caltrops. Your light attacks are also really good source of DPS. Again, we are doing a light attack rotation because Bound Armaments does buff only our light attacks now. It doesn't buff our heavy attacks anymore. And we can see Hurricane and Poison Injection kind of make up the rear, and so on and so forth here. You can see here that we do get a few Implosion procs. We got 6 Implosion procs that time. It does help out our DPS a little bit. It does about the same amount as the Twin Blade and Blunt, so that's the bleed from the axe. That's kind of, it's a nice little boost to our DPS. It's not that much, 642, but every little bit does help out here. And again, we don't have Major Fracture. If we look at our debuffs out, we don't have any Major Fracture at all. Nothing. No Major Fracture. So in order to kind of compare this to a class that has Major Fracture built in, so for example a Stam DK, you just add about 10% additional DPS, so I'll round this up to about 4k. So if we had somebody providing Major Fracture for us, we'd be pulling around 43k, 44k or so. So that's about what you can expect us to see with a Major Fracture Stam Sorc. So that's the number that you want to use to compare against the Stam DK and the Stamina Warden, and you also want to use that to compare against the Stamina Nightblade, even though Stam Nightblades also have Minor Berserk as well built into their skill sets. So that's it for this build. If you guys have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. I will try to get back to them as soon as I can. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.